All right, everyone. Thank you for joining Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. So we're having a part 2, a follow-up to our previous conversation with Mike Konrad from Appion. Mike, how you doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. We're actually hanging out here. We've got our Christmas party going on at the ESCO headquarters in Mount Prospect, Illinois. So hanging out with Eugene and Daniel. Eugene's going to be filling us in on any questions, things that we want to dive deeper into, science behind refrigerants. We're going to put Eugene on the spot maybe once in a while. He didn't know that, but we're right now. Daniel's going to be running show. And for those that don't know, Daniel's always with us every week. So Daniel's in the background just making sure things are nice and slow and flow. It's all going well and making this magic happen so that we can all have fun and learn about this industry of HVACR. So Mike, on our series 1, we dove into advanced practices for recovery. For this one, we're going to start talking about the hot topic of the entire year for our industry. We're going to talk about A2L and A3 refrigerants, and we're going to go over best practices for recovery and evacuation. So yeah, man, let's dive into this. This is exciting.
Yeah, man. It's definitely, it's a crazy subject for a lot of people. And there seems to be a lot of, I think panic is a strong word.
I don't know. Very good word.
but in reality, it's not that big of a deal. And, through you guys, through the manufacturers, hopefully we can kind of shed some light onto this subject. In reality with a lot of this stuff, it's just going to be, what was once best practice is now going to be required. And that's really all there is to it. So, one of the biggest things is people always ask us, hey, are you guys A2L compatible? And I kind of wanted to just start today by just saying, hey, listen, making tools and equipment A2L compatible on the manufacturer side, on the tool side, is actually not that hard. It's pretty easy to do. But in reality, it's on the technician to make sure that the technician is up to date and has the proper certifications, and knows what's going on while they're working. So today, we're going to shed a little bit of a light on that as well. But yeah, so I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, this is some really good stuff. And everyone that's joining us, let us know where you're joining from. We always like to learn how big our community of HVACR professionals are. I see Russell hopping in with us. Russell saying that he's learned about A2Ls from the Jason's book here at ESCO Institute. Thank you so much, Russell. And we appreciate you joining in today. And he was also asking about part 1. It's out there on YouTube. Just go over to ESCO Institute, HVAC Excellence, and you'll see the original one that we did with Mike. And I'll probably put a playlist together too that will be all the Appion training that we do. So it'll just be playlist, Appion, and I'll start calculating these things together. So yeah, sweet. Let's hop on in there. Nate, thanks for joining us. Chad, Russell.
Mike, let me just ask you a question real quick before we hop in. So we get a lot of calls from technicians, from teachers that are concerned. And you just said something. I just want to reiterate and just verify that if we're already out in the field and we're exhibiting best practices and we're doing best practices and we've been doing that for years, then when we're dealing with A2Ls and other newer refrigerants, that business is pretty much as usual. If we're doing the right things, then those practices are going to transfer almost 100% over to new refrigerants. Is that safe to say?
Yep. And here in a couple slides, I'll actually give you some examples of that. So you're right on the money. Right on the money. So, but are you guys good to go ahead and jump into it?
Let's roll into it, man. We're going to go over to the side and we're going to put this right up front so everyone can see where we're at here.
Cool. All right. So for part 1, we ended advanced recovery, and we ended right here on this slide. And this is kind of the introduction to our side of A2L, if you will.
Yeah.
So I got a little funny graphic here. You better check yourself before you wreck yourself when it comes to A2Ls. Let's see here. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here.
That's okay.
There we go. Okay. So Proper precaution should be followed when handling or recovering A2L refrigerants. So, the following is pretty generalized, and we have a pretty big safety bulletin on our website under technical support.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a link out there for everyone. I'm going to shrink us down a little bit and make sure that those resources are here for anyone that wants to grab those. And that'll be over in the chat later too, once I reduce it down in the screen.
Cool. So just a few things right here that are probably really important to note. First is going to be grounding your equipment. So as we know, refrigerants can create a static charge when in the right environment, especially dry climates. So those of you that are in the desert, yep. So, we have actually had people call us and say, hey, I had a static spark and my recovery cylinder grounded through the scale and fried the circuit board on the scale.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I've seen some posts on forums about it. Never had it myself, but I mean, it kind of makes sense, especially if you have a large volume of refrigerant flowing through.
Yep. So, when it comes to anything that is considered mildly flammable or flammable, obviously we don't want to have any sort of static spark. Right. And so just another safety measure we can do is making sure we ground our equipment, especially our cylinder. So, invest in some grounding clamps, shave off the paint on the cylinder and connect your grounding clamps and ground all of your equipment. Obviously your system should be grounded. Verify that. If you're using an Appion G5 twin recovery pump, obviously it's going to be grounded through the cord. Right. So, just double checking that everything is grounded. Another one is going to be not mixing air with anything that is considered mildly flammable or flammable.
We've heard a lot about that here recently.
Yep. So this goes back to kind of the beginning of the recovery, where one of the points I said was, hey, make sure you functions test your tools and equipment before each and every job. It was a big deal then, and it's a big deal now. And, obviously nothing's more frustrating than when you have to drive 45 minutes somewhere or an hour plus somewhere to do a job and your equipment doesn't work. But more importantly, when dealing with A2Ls, you want to make sure that your gaskets are good. All of that stuff. You want to make sure it's all working properly because we don't want to have any accidental ingestion of air. And so a big one is going to be 0 PSI. So when handling A2L refrigerants, we're no longer talking about 10 or 15 inches anymore. We're talking about 0 PSI because as soon as you go into a vacuum, you are going to increase the chances of accidental ingestion of air. So go to 0 PSI. And then when you're at 0 PSI, blank off, make sure it's holding because it may go back up a little bit. Right. And if it goes back up, just keep recovering. And then once you are confident that you're holding 0, then you're done. And then another one that's pretty important here at the bottom is going to be when you're done with your recovery, you want to make sure that you're purging the system with oxygen-free dry nitrogen. Yeah. So that is going to completely neutralize any flammable media that would be left over. So you can go in there and safely braise or do whatever you have to do.
Yeah, I imagine the nitrogen, the gas suppliers are kind of looking forward to the transition of refrigerants because now everyone will be using nitrogen like they were supposed to be using.
But Clinton, it's not only the nitrogen, because the nitrogen we get from welding supply stores, and supply houses, is not dry nitrogen.
That's true. It has moisture.
Because you can pretty much take any nitrogen tank you get from any supply house, and if you invert it and open up that tank, water will shoot out. So when we're talking about oxygen-free nitrogen, we're talking about medical grade nitrogen, which is more expensive than the stuff we get at the welding supply house. But that's what 90% of our field techs are using. Yeah. And this, it's nitrogen. Right. It's automatically dry.
Nitrogen. Sure.
But what happens is when that nitrogen tank is open and it's empty, and it gets cold, and we get moisture condensing inside. So when we're talking about oxygen-free nitrogen, we're talking about medical grade nitrogen, which is something most of us in this industry are not using, and we need to make certain we're using that.
Yeah, it's a good question to bring up for our distributors if we're actually converting over to different supplies of nitrogen now.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, another big one is going to be, making sure that you're up to date with your local, state, federal laws. This stuff right now is super fluid with the government, as you guys probably can attest to. But this stuff can change not only from state to state, but it can change from county to county or city to city. You guys can fact check me on this one, but I want to say that the laws are different between even like Wisconsin and Illinois. Is that true? Can you fact check me on that one? Because I remember hearing that somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, every state has their own regulations, so you really need. Yeah. So I mean, sometimes we get people, oh well, you're not answering the question or you're not addressing. But the thing is, we have 50 states in our union,
right?
And every state has different laws and regulations, and even different jurisdictions within each state.
Yeah, I mean, you have. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you have federal law, you have state law, and then you can have city ordinance, which is still law. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely important to make sure that as the technician, you understand what's going on and every location that you're going to, because at the end of the day, if something happens, guess what? It's on you. It's on you. And so it's super important to understand this stuff. But as I would imagine that as we get closer and closer to, all of this, is that the government's going to help us out and provide as many documentation as possible. And, organizations like you guys, providing information, that's, definitely a reference, ESCO group for all that. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we try to stay up to date with what is changing. We've actually started a A2L fact check blog to stay up to date with things that are changing in the industry. And then that's why we work with our partners, our partner training, like Appion, directly. Instead of waiting to the third hand, fourth hand information a year down the road, we're getting it as it is coming out. So
one thing neat about the blog is that it's not opinion.
Yeah.
So everything that's on A2L Blogspot, I'm sorry, what is it? A2L Fact Check blogspot.com. I think that's it.
Do you see what we're doing?
Yeah.
We're playing on Daniel's video.
There you go. so yeah, it's not opinion.
Yeah.
So it's all facts. It's all straight from the hip. Some of it's not easy to read in the sense that stuff that we don't want to read.
Yeah.
But it's all out there to give the 411.
That's right.
That's right. So this brings me to my next topic, and this is a subject here at Appion that we stand pretty firm on. Guys, we're about to see some crazy things happening in our industry, and I never want to badmouth anybody, but as technicians, you gotta be able to understand that, take everything with a grain of salt. There's going to be tools that are out there that are going to say you can recover A3 refrigerants. Appion's standpoint on this is do not recover A3 refrigerants, even if the recovery pump or tools say A3 compatible. The reasoning for this is because we're talking about a highly flammable refrigerant now. We're talking about like propane. Okay. So in our industry, we use temporary connections. We do not use fixed connections like oil and gas industry. And so remember when I was talking about accidental ingestion of air with A2Ls, this is even greater with A3. So, statement right here: a significant risk with the recovery of hydrocarbon refrigerants due to the accidental ingestion of air being pumped in the recovery tank, which creates an explosion hazard. So, accidental ingestion of air can come from many scenarios, to include faulty system components, improper system installation, improperly purged hoses, worn hose gaskets, worn recovery pump compressor components. Clifton, what is your favorite hobby that you would say that you are, pretty good at?
I'd say woodworking is probably the hobby that I choose the most.
Okay. So you like to do woodworking. So, is it fair to say that when you are in the shop that you sometimes make mistakes?
I have a few scars and stitches to prove that. Yes.
But you got 10 fingers.
Yeah, I almost lost one of them though. I mean, that's the one that's got the 10 stitches.
Exactly. So, I always joke about my trainings. I don't care if you're an Olympic level HVAC technician.
Mhm.
You're gonna mess up. Everyone messes up. Nobody's perfect. And so, when you're handling A3 refrigerants, don't let that be the day that you make a mistake, because that could be really dangerous. And so the EPA says that we can vent these types of refrigerants. So we can do that.
And we actually had a comment that just came in from Russell Johnson. Russell, thanks for joining us today. So the comment that came in was, it was told that HC or hydrocarbon refrigerants can be released to the air due to the refrigerant being natural refrigerant. And that is the case. So currently it is not required to recover A3 refrigerants. Now, there have been some instances in the past where we've had equipment manufacturers have tools available for recovering A2L refrigerants in specific applications, but it was not a powered recovery device. It was just another container in a vacuum that you could actually store refrigerant in for temporary use. But currently it is allowed for the release of hydrocarbon refrigerants. So yeah, not required to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just to kind of, put the nail in the coffin, industries that work with hydrocarbons avoid these risks by constantly venting air and hydrocarbon vapors while transferring in a pure liquid only state and using fixed connections. So just reiterating exactly what we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff.
Yep. So now this is our intermission right here, but I'm going to just go ahead and jump into evacuation. So today for advanced evacuation practices, I am a firm believer that even if you are the most skilled person, it's always nice to go back to some fundamentals real quick and just prime the brain, get it ready to learn, and then jump into it.
Okay.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss importance of digital measurement, defining a vacuum, importance of vacuum pump oil, vacuum pumps made for ACR technicians, A2L and A3 evacuation safety, tracking evacuation progress, understanding flow restrictions, and then applying full flow to other evacuation methods.
I think this will be a good class.
Maybe I'll attend.
Yeah, I know. I think we'll have to be here for this one.
So let's go over the importance of digital measurement. So before we can get into this, let's establish a micron. So a micron is a unit of measurement equal to 1/1,000,000th of a meter. It is related to the displacement of a mercury column by atmospheric pressure, known as inches of mercury. So I know I have a lot of guys out there that are using, analog gauges. Those are awesome tools to know how to use. And here at Appion, all we're saying is, hey, listen, let's use those tools as backup tools on the truck, keep them on the truck, and make sure that everyone knows how to use them. But let's walk into the 21st century.
So 30 inches on my gauge isn't good enough, Eugene.
And if the number's not good enough, you could take the cover off.
Yeah,
the
I can
gauge,
adjust
and
it.
there's
And
a
I can prove it.
screwdriver,
I can set it.
You can adjust that.
I can put it lower than 30 if you need me to.
So, if you can see this graphic on the screen, what's pretty crazy with the analog gauges is, let's just say I have a meter stick. Okay.
Yeah.
So what an analog gauge is doing is it's taking that meter stick and it's shrinking it down to a scale, of I don't know, what is that, like a quarter or a half an inch, so, it's not that big. And so what happens is you can't even tell the difference between 50,000 microns and 500 microns.
Yeah.
The boiling points at those different micron levels, 50,000 microns, your boiling point is going to be 102 degrees Fahrenheit. at 500 microns, your boiling point is going to be -12.
Pretty significant.
Two completely different phases of your evacuation process. And so with a digital gauge, we are now kind of giving you your meter stick back, if you will. So we're blowing it back up to full scale, and we're adding a magnifying glass so you can look at each little tick mark all the way down.
Sure.
So what's even cooler about digital gauges is when you have a full range digital gauge. So what we mean by full range is being able to read your micron level from atmospheric pressure all the way down to and through your decay test. And so I know that some of these digital vacuum gauges that are out there, I think they start kicking on at like 20,000 microns or something like that. But, let's just say, for my refrigeration guys, or, guys that are out there working on huge chillers, being able to see what's happening from atmosphere is awesome, because it takes away the guesswork from the job. So we can go ahead and get everything going, and we can get immediate feedback as to, is my evacuation going according to plan, or, do I have a leak, instead of just sitting there for
minutes going.
In residential, I did quite a bit of residential.
Yeah.
What happened was like exactly what you're talking about. You put the micron gauge there, and you're waiting for like 10 minutes. Is it working? Not working, because it starts measuring at a certain. But if you have a wider range, you can actually see the thing moving and know that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Did I seal up that other side of the system or not? I'm not rookie.
Yeah. Find out. We went in for half hour and it's not doing anything. Bad idea.
Yeah. Absolutely. So,
Mike, just think, how many microns is the thickness of an analog gauge's needle?
Oh, just the width of the needle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're probably looking at a few thousand.
Tell you.
I can measure it.
I bet you could.
But you're probably looking at a few thousand microns just in the thickness of the needle itself.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. So definitely important, especially with new technology. And, I'm going to kind of get into this a little bit later on during the data logging section. But, as we advance with technology, we're going to start seeing more requirements and specs out of system manufacturers. Yes. And so these kind of tools are going to just make it a lot easier. So those of you who are already using digital vacuum gauges, let's go over some proper use and care.
Sure.
And this goes for really, any brand out there, not just talking about Appion. So first and foremost, correct placement of your gauge is absolutely critical. Having your vacuum gauge on the pump doesn't make any sense. We want that gauge as far away from the pump as possible, because our vacuum pump creates what's called a local pressure deviation. So vacuum is strongest at the pump. So we want to make sure that gauge is as far as possible, so we're getting accurate readings. A common question that I get at this point is, well, Mike, isn't it just going to all equal out anyway, so it doesn't really matter? Well, technically, the answer to that is yes, but you're going to be waiting a long time, because we are dealing with fractions of a PSI here. And so we want to make sure that gauge is as far as possible. I'm not really helping out here with as far as trying to get there, but I'm just going to say it. There's a video on our Instagram page. I don't know how down in the videos it is, but we usually do like a Tech Tip Tuesday. And one of those videos, I did a video of this where I had a vacuum gauge on the pump. I had a vacuum gauge, right there on the valve core tool. And then with our little Daikin unit here, we have so many just little service ports placed on there just for playing around. And so we have one that's really far on the high side, and I put one up there. And so I'm doing my evacuation, and the gauge that's reading on the pump, if I can remember correctly, was somewhere around, like 150 or something like that. And then the one on the valve core tool was showing somewhere around like 220, 230.
Okay.
And then the farthest one was still like at like 350 or 400.
Wow.
So, there's a big difference there. So, definitely when it comes to evacuation, the tools that we make, we're going to get you through your evacuation as fast as possible. You can count on us for that. But don't cheat it. Don't cheat the system. Don't cheat your decay tests. We'll get you there as fast as we can, but don't cheat this stuff.
Sure.
Mike, if I can interrupt you real quick. So when people say, okay, but why? Again, laws of physics, our pressures are going to equalize. And I just create this visual with them, especially I give the analogy of an airplane. The airplane's full of passengers and the plane arrives at the gate. The ding goes off. Everybody stands up and the front cabin doors open and people start deplaning. And if you're measuring the concentration of people at the gate, at the door of the plane, yeah, you know what? There aren't many people there because people are moving freely getting off the plane. But if you look back at row 35, 36, 37, 38,
take a measurement.
They haven't moved at all. So if you're taking a reading at the back of the plane, nothing's changed.
Yep.
So if you're taking that reading at the back of the plane, now once that pressure starts dropping, you know that everything forward of that point is at a better pressure level than where you're reading it. So the as far away as you can get from that pump, you're reading your worst possible pressure. Everything else, every other point in that system is going to be at a more desirable pressure.
That's right.
So you've got a good reading at the back of the plane. You have an amazing reading at the front of the plane. So I just create that visual, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yep. So the number one enemy of a digital vacuum gauge is going to be oils getting onto that sensor as they migrate during the evacuation process. So those of you who have digital vacuum gauges, I'm going to save you some warranties real quick. So gravity is a thing. So we want to make sure that our vacuum gauge is upright. Don't let that thing slide or flop over. At a 45-degree angle, that's fine. But make sure you can get that thing as upright as possible because gravity will assist those oils onto a sensor. So another thing is making sure that when you buy these digital vacuum gauges that they have oil catch filters down there at the fitting. That is going to be another big one. Okay. Also using, side port of a valve core tool that's going to have a Schrader valve on it. Schrader valve is a metering device, as we learned in our recovery series. So, that's also going to help prevent oils from getting through. We also have things like, I'm going to do a little sales plug here. We have our new Appion core control tool. So that core control tool, I call it kind of the 3-in-1 tool. It's only about that big, but it is kind of our answer to core max valves and high flow Schraders, and for assistance with these digital vacuum gauges. So those of you who are working on, Daikin, Fujitsu, Mitsubishi, Rheem, any of those units, they have those core max valves on it or a high flow Schrader.
Sure.
And the spacing at those ports are so tight, or conveniently it's against a wall. So trying to get a valve core removal tool in there is next to impossible. Plus it doesn't really work anyways on those valves. So we made a core depressor. So this core depressor tool, and if you're going to go to AHR in Chicago, come swing by our booth and I can kind of give you guys a live demonstration of this. But I have like a standard core depressor, and I'll use like a standard core depressor on one of those core max valves. You'd be amazed with how much it actually doesn't really open that thing. It's considered a high flow strainer, but it barely even opens. And so with this core control tool, we're able to really get good contact there and really push in that high flow strainer. That way we can see the full potential of the high flow strainer. Yeah. And it's got a nice little dial on the back, so we can just, for charging applications, we can, really just dial in how much we're letting go into that system. So that's, two things right there with the core control tool. So you got charging, you've got your core max valve depressor, but going back to the vacuum gauge, what we can do here is we can attach that core control tool to the side port of the valve core tool. And now we can backseat seal the core control tool, and we don't have any oils now that are able to migrate onto that gauge. So I know that was kind of long-winded, but I'm going to loop this all back.
It's very important.
So now with, for example, this Appion gauge, what we can do is we have it protected by a Schrader. We have gravity on our side with it in an upright position. We have oil catch filters in there. And we have a core control tool in place that is going to backseat seal, and we're not even going to have any oil getting on there at all. Just so multiple layers of protection.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the questions that just came in was about those filters, because a lot of people don't realize that they're even there. And that is at the tool itself inside of the actual metering port. And it's very common for those to get plugged. I was actually judging up at a competition for the UA up in Ann Arbor, Michigan this year. And one of the students was getting very disgruntled with his procedure. And, you can't give any advice, but you can, look around and see what's going on. And I had a bag of filters that I'd set on a desk, and I don't think he actually knew what they were. And, just not knowing that improper procedure can get one of those filters plugged with oil. And no matter how good your job is, if that filter pad is plugged with oil, you're never going to get a proper reading.
Yep. And I see a comment there. Someone, I think it's Mr. Ray Orton. He said, any pics of this setup? So on the graphic right there on, I guess it would be my right, you can actually see what I'm talking about there with the Appion gauge connected to the Appion core control tool, and then on that valve core tool as well.
Okay. Yep.
So that's what that's going to look like.
Okay.
So what is a vacuum? So I guess scientifically speaking, I guess the answer to that would be a void or a space without matter in it. But in the context of system evacuation, it's just a positive pressure that is below atmospheric pressure. So, we're in a vacuum here in Denver, Colorado, compared to somewhere like Miami, Florida. So what is evacuation on a refrigeration system? It is the degassing and dehydration of a hermetic system that is designed to run with nothing other than refrigerant and compressor oil. So why is system evacuation important? System efficiency and longevity of system components. So really, all we're doing here, I have an example on the screen. So, if we got like a 75-degree day out, so all we're doing is we're just putting the system in an evacuation or in a vacuum, and we are taking the boiling point of moisture and we're bringing that boiling point as low and as fast as possible. So, at sea level, your boiling point is going to be 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So, water is going to boil at 212 degrees. So if we're going to take that boiling point and just sink it as fast as possible, as soon as we get past whatever our ambient temperature is, that's when we're going to start boiling. So the whole point of this is to get it done as fast and as quick and as deep as possible. That way we can just blast through our evacuation process. So a huge topic here is going to be, hey, Mike, if I have a large CFM vacuum pump, aren't I just going to freeze up all the moisture in the system? The answer to that is yes. So, but we have science on our side, and that is the concept of sublimation. So all sublimation means is it's a direct solid to vapor phase change. So moisture can freeze up and still evaporate in ice form.
Sure.
It does not have to go back to a liquid in order to evaporate. Now, the question is when do I have too much moisture? And so if you have too much moisture, yeah, it's still going to evaporate, but you're right, it is going to take a long time. So as the technician, you have to be able to go onto a job site and just really diagnose everything and ask yourself, hey, how much moisture do I think is in the system? Should I just go ahead and do a nitrogen sweep beforehand so I can blow all this stuff out of here so I'm not wasting my time?
Right.
Those of you out there that have a TES 8 vacuum pump, you can actually do a little science experiment. So behind me, I have one. You have your debris catch tube and your oil change feature. So take a syringe and just put a tiny amount of water in there. I mean, just as small as possible. And you want to drop that tiny amount of water into the debris catch tube.
Okay.
Then anytime you start a TES 8 vacuum pump, you want to make sure that your 1/2 inch cap is off. And then when you turn off your vacuum pump, you want to make sure that it's off. So what you're going to do is you're going to take off your cap.
Hey, Mike, is there a chance of bringing that TES 8 over there closer to you so we can get a better shot of it?
Knocking over everything.
That's right. That's like joining. You never know.
If only the viewers out there knew that I'm in this tiny little corner of my office. So
that's perfect.
I don't know if you can see it. So you got your debris catch tube and then your oil change feature over here. So you want to take this 1/2 inch cap off, drop a little bit of moisture in that debris catch tube, and then start your vacuum pump.
Okay.
So what's going to end up happening is over time, you're going to watch the moisture get pulled all into the oil. Okay. As that water drop is leaving, it will then turn to ice and you'll watch it before your eyes. It's pretty cool.
But we don't have one yet. Oh, I wish we had one.
So then you're going to notice that you're collecting a lot of moisture in your oil and your vacuum gauge is going to start stalling.
Okay.
So once your vacuum gauge starts stalling, change your oil. And then it's going to continue to go really fast. And then all of a sudden, that ice will be gone.
Okay.
So that is the concept of sublimation.
Yeah.
You guys have any questions on that?
I've not done that.
Yeah, I did. That's pretty cool.
I'm going to have to do that.
One thing, Mike, just to clarify, so there are a lot of techs out go, oh, well, the vacuum pump removes moisture from a system. And I always say it's true, but it's not true. I said, what's actually happening is the vacuum pump is dropping the pressure in the system, which is lowering the boiling point of the water. And now the water is evaporating, and then the vacuum pump is pulling out that vapor. So it's not like the vacuum pump is actually pulling or removing moisture.
Sure.
It's handling the vapor, but it's lowering the boiling point. If you've gone to trade school or if you're a teacher, you might have seen or performed this demonstration where you take a mason jar, put water in it with a 1/4 inch male flare on it, and then you connect your vacuum pump to the flare and you start pulling.
Yep, boiling your water.
Yeah, and you're pulling vapor off. Yeah. And then the water in the mason jar starts boiling at room temperature. So it's the same concept, really just lowering the boiling point of the water.
Yep. And so, just going back to, if you have a lot of moisture, just do a nitrogen sweep because you're going to completely just bypass the frustration of having to do multiple evacuations. So yes, it will freeze up. But if there's a small amount of moisture, it doesn't matter. If there's a lot of moisture, then nitrogen sweep.
Yeah. And I think Russell had asked the question about how much is too much vacuum.
Right. I did see that.
And there's no such thing as over evacuation. You can never over evacuate a system. As low as the system will pull, that's good. You can't say, oh, too much evacuation, too much vacuum, and you give some back.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it all comes down to, I guess, a buyer preference. So of course we want you to go out there and buy, our 8CFM pump, but my coworker Dan has such a great analogy. You don't need a dually to tow a John boat. So some of those guys out there are working on small systems. You don't need such a huge vacuum pump.
Yeah, I always used to say you don't need a steamroller to crack a walnut.
Right. That's
some guys
one-liners today and analogies for all your educated.
Some guys like a Tacoma. So, but no, I get it. So let's talk about the importance of vacuum pump oil. Okay. So the functions of vacuum pump oil is it lubricates the pump, it cools the pump, it captures contaminants, but most importantly, it acts as a sealing component. So an example of that here is the inside of Teze on the rotor, and you're looking at the tip of the vane there where the oil is acting as a sealing component. Another example of this could be, and this is again best practice, if you're using a valve core removal tool, put a little bit of vacuum oil on the service port and then connect your valve core removal tool, because again, that's going to act as a sealant. So just extra protection, if you will. So an oil's vapor pressure dictates the ultimate vacuum the pump can achieve. Okay. So I always ask people, when was the last time they changed their oil on their vacuum pump?
It falls over.
Yeah, when it tips out. When it's all
I was just gonna say that. Most people go when it falls over in the truck.
I actually have a fun story. The first job that I had, I asked him if they had a vacuum pump.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, there's one in the back. And they've been working for years.
Yeah. So
I picked a vacuum pump, and you know how it has the access for you to. I opened it, and it was mud. It was literally brown, like sludge, chocolate, thick.
Yeah, getting used for jobs.
So they told me the last time they changed the oil was like 20 years ago. So that makes sense.
The world we encounter.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So whether or not you're using a oil change feature pump, or I guess I should clarify, if you're using an on the fly oil change feature pump, make sure that you're changing that oil. So if you got a traditional vacuum pump, make sure you're changing that oil after every job. Because your oil and it starts at a low vapor pressure. So let's just say, for example, we're starting at 1 micron. So as we do our evacuation and as we're capturing contaminants or moisture or whatever, the vapor pressure of that oil is climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And all of a sudden you can end up at 2000 microns. Okay. So, what happens there is your vacuum pump starts stalling. And so, and then you start getting frustrated and you're questioning all of your tools and you're going, what is going on, when it's just simply change your oil. And you'll notice a speed difference when you change your oil. So I'm going to actually circle back to this here in a minute. But what I have on the screen here is being able to identify contaminants of your oil. So clean oil is going to be that center bottle. And vacuum pump oil can come from the manufacturer as either clear in color, or it can be like a yellowish in tint color. So if you get a brand new bottle of oil from anyone and it has kind of like a yellowish tint, it's not ruined. That's clean vacuum pump oil. So if you notice there on the left, you're going to see dark oil. So dark oil is going to signify, lack of nitrogen during brazing, compressor burnout, any of that. And then on the right side, you're going to see like kind of like a cloudy or milky type of oil, and that is going to signify moisture.
Sure.
I see all the comments where everyone's like, I change my oil every time.
Absolutely. When I was out in the field doing
That's
vacuum pump training and installation training, that was the very first thing I did when I go to a contractor. I would ask them to pull a report of how much vacuum pump oil they've purchased in the last month and in the last year. And that way I could tell what they've been doing for best practices for installation. And by God, I sold a lot of oil in my days.
So, kind of getting into vacuum pumps that are actually designed for you guys and not repurposing scientific vacuum pumps for this job. So Appion is all about, and we recognize that our industry is repurposing tools to try to do a job. Okay. Where we are making tools that are specifically designed for recovery and evacuation. So what do I mean by that? So if you notice here on the picture, we're kind of comparing vacuum pumps. So you're going to notice on kind of that traditional standard vacuum pump, you have the sight glass. And so I have a little example of that right here. The problem with a sight glass is you may be looking at that oil condition going, oh, you know, that looks kind of decent. I'm going to continue to go. But in reality, in the bottom, it is just dark, and it's not looking good. And so what's really cool about the TES 8 is you have that window, and you can actually see where your oil condition is. So if I'm doing my evacuation and I'm watching my gauge and it starts stalling, I immediately go, what's my oil condition?
Yeah.
And then I check it real quick and I go, yep, that's bad. And as soon as I change it, we're rocking and rolling again. So that's a benefit of having that window there instead of having a sight glass. Another feature that you're going to see is that connection tree at the top. So I think there's a couple other brands out there that have multiple port connections. Yeah. So finding vacuum pumps that have those multiple hose connections is awesome, because the more hoses, the better. So we definitely want to have as many hoses as we can, but you want to make sure, and I'll talk about this again in a little bit. Let's just say you're using a 1/2-inch hose. 1/2-inch hose is going to have like 3 CFM. So if you've got 3 CFM hoses on your 8 CFM pump, you're going to start to outperform the CFM rating of your pump. At that point, it's going to be better just to deploy a secondary vacuum pump. But we'll go into that here in a little bit. But yes, the more hoses, the better. And then you're going to notice on the top there, and I'll grab my TES 8 again. So you have your exhaust, and this exhaust can unscrew and become a garden hose attachment. So let's just say you're working in a clean room or hospital, and you need to vent out your exhaust. You can just attach your garden hose there and run it out the building.
Well, that actually brings up a really good point, because I had a question earlier about the proper venting of pumps. And now, yeah, good call. Jason just asked the question, is this TES 8 one of our A2L rated pieces of equipment? And I can see a very good reason for this one to be because of that little feature right there.
Yep. All of our equipment is A2L compatible. In fact, our equipment has been A2L compatible since its creation. I think 20 years ago.
Yeah, so before A2L certifications became A2L certifications.
Yeah. So as long as you have original Appion parts, or if you bought repair kits like O-rings and stuff that are all Appion, you're fine. The minute that you start putting aftermarket parts on our pumps, that's when it's going to void A2L compatibility. Okay. So, but yeah, if you bought a G5 Twin, 20 years ago, you're fine.
Okay, so I can actually attach, like, say, a garden hose to that fitting, run that exhaust outdoors. Just say I was indoors doing an evacuation for whatever reason. Maybe it's 20 foot of snow and I have to do some work from the inside. Maybe I'm working on a walk-in cooler. I'm working on a piece of equipment where I'm indoors. I can now vent that directly outside and get any potentially combustible gases outdoors.
That's right. That's right. So
cool.
You see with that graph there as well, with going back to oil change features, the
Mm-hmm.
more we can change our oil, the faster our evacuation process is going to be. So, yes, you can change your oil 20 times in the first 15 minutes, but that depends on the system. It all depends on the system and the environment in which it's in. Sometimes it takes 2 oil changes, sometimes it takes 20. But you can buy a couple cartridges, get a gallon of oil, and just reuse those cartridges, and you'll be good to go. And bill the customer for your oil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I get billed for shop rags when I get my oil.
So going back to vapor pressure, and this is going to kind of really kind of help tie this all back together.
Okay.
So another feature or feature list, I guess would be a word to use, is there is no gas ballast on the TES 8 vacuum pump. Why? So the point of the gas ballast is it's chipping away at that vapor pressure. Okay. So let's just say we have our vapor pressure has climbed all the way up to 2000 microns. As your gas ballast is coming around, it is just slowly chipping away at that vapor pressure. It's 2000 microns. 1,999, 1,990, so forth and so on. When you have a on-the-fly oil change feature, we are resetting the vapor pressure to 1 immediately. There's no chipping away at the vapor pressure. So instead of going 2,000, 1,999, so forth and so on, we're going 2,000, boom, 1, done. And that's all we're doing. So that is a huge benefit to having an on-the-fly oil change feature on your pump. Another thing to keep in mind here, talking about A2L or A3 evacuation, if you're going to be using a vacuum pump that has a gas ballast, you want to buy a gas ballast adapter to introduce argon or oxygen-free dry nitrogen into the compression cycle instead of ambient air, because we don't want to have any air mixing with our A2Ls or A3s.
Absolutely, which you would in the gas ballast application.
So
I didn't think about that.
I said earlier with recovery, absolutely not for A3, but for evacuation, all day, we're good.
Yeah,
Just again, if you're using a gas ballast adapter or have a gas ballast, make sure that you have a gas ballast adapter to introduce argon or oxygen-free dry nitrogen, because we don't want to have any sort of explosion in our vacuum pump. That would really suck if we had, if you had bought, a couple $1,000 vacuum pump and all of a sudden it catastrophic failures.
That would really suck because the vacuum pump wouldn't suck. Is that how that works? I don't know.
So little Appion plug. Go buy a TES 8. You don't have to worry about a gas ballast.
I was going to go there. I was sitting here thinking about, dry nitrogen in itself. So we're talking about, using dry nitrogen. There's going to be an additional cost to that for, for doing purging and for brazing. But think about that just even on the vacuum pump. If I'm going to be adding an adapter, a gas ballast adapter, purging dry nitrogen through it the entire time I go to lunch. I mean, that's how long the vacuum must have.
You don't eat.
But no, so we're gonna purge dry nitrogen through while we're pulling a vacuum. That's a lot of dry nitrogen, potentially.
Mike, do you know what kind of pressure you're talking about? So if you're using a gas ballast,
because we have to regulate it, pretty minimum,
and you're connecting to medical grade nitrogen, what kind of pressure are we looking at that was supposed to be introduced?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
But I can
figure that out for you.
I bet we'll have some additional resources on that just for those that haven't converted over to an Appion yet.
That's a good question, Eugene. I'll find that out for you.
And if I find out before, I'll let you know.
There we go. I like it.
A couple times I've had people ask me this is, can't I just keep my gas ballast closed? Yeah, you could, but you're going to be changing your oil a lot. And some of those vacuum pumps contain a lot of oil. And I believe our oil containers are only like 7 ounces. So it's not a lot. So yeah, so you're going to be changing your oil a lot if you're going to keep your gas ballast closed.
Exactly.
Okay, so understanding flow restrictions. So we're going to go fast like my man Ricky Bobby here on the screen. So really, so when it comes to flow restrictions for evacuation, you're going to actually find that it's pretty similar to recovery.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to, again, start with removing your Schrader valves. So with a Schrader valve, keep in mind this. When you're evacuating through a Schrader valve, you're only allowing 0.3 CFM through your Schrader valve. So if you went and bought an 8, 10, 12 CFM pump and you're evacuating through a Schrader valve, you just nerfed your vacuum pump.
Yeah.
You're only getting 0.3 CFM. So it is a must to remove your Schrader valve. Same thing with core depressors and hoses. Get them out of there. So we also want to increase our hose diameter as well. So you'll notice that we have introduced a 1/2-inch hose. So if we want to kind of backtrack a little bit to recovery, I had mentioned EPA's de minimis rule.
You got me on that one.
So for recovery applications, we can't go above 3/8 inch in diameter because the EPA said that's the max, that's the limit. When we unplug all of our or unattach all of our hoses, what's left in a 3/8 is okay, but anything larger than that is now starting to become harmful to the ozone. So for evacuation, though, we can introduce a 1/2-inch hose, and boy, is that fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing is going to be the use of a Y fitting if you want to run multiple hoses, and getting rid of the manifold. The manifold is going to be more leak points. So a Y fitting is definitely going to be the move there. So here's a picture of an advanced evacuation setup. So on the left, you see, 4 hoses going into one pump. And then kind of backtracking again, I had mentioned earlier, 1/2-inch hose is 3 CFM. So if we're going to have 4 3 CFM hoses on an 8 CFM pump, then you're going to start to outperform that pump. So it's better to just deploy a secondary vacuum pump. Another misconception out there is vacuum pumps fight each other. That is not true. Vacuum pumps don't fight each other because they have that local pressure deviation. In fact, they actually boost their performance. So having more vacuum pumps is a must, and do it.
Yeah, I love this diagram because that is a very common application in my old grocery stores. And that's all we had was TES 8s. If I had a large rack, I just called in reinforcements. I brought some extra machines over and off we went. So that's a very good representation.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We'll get people that'll send us photos all the time, and they got vans just converted with. They run all their hoses through their van. They have all these recovery banks and evacuation banks, and it's crazy.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of genius ways to tackle this that are out there.
Yeah. How do you recover a 1,400-pound R22 medium temp refrigeration system?
1 ounce at a time.
6 recovery units and 6 vacuum pumps.
So these are just some time savings that you can see by applying some of these techniques. So on screen, those of you who are listening, we're showing a 15-ton chiller where once it took this gentleman 2 weeks to do for his evacuation. And by using everything that we talked about today, he's down to 26 hours.
Nice. Well, this is really going to come into play as we're talking about A2L refrigerant conversions, because we're going to have a lot well, everyone in the industry, whether you're in residential, commercial, industrial, you are going to be working with A2L refrigerants, either in new equipment or as replacement refrigerants. So a lot of these conversions that we will be seeing in the future, we're going to really be looking for faster evacuation, faster recovery times. So these procedures are critical when we're talking about, retrofittings and installations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's another example. Like you were saying, Clifton, a rack system.
Yep.
So once 23 hours, now he's down to 2.
Yep.
And then just some more time savings there on screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very noticeable, especially those of you who are doing commercial, recovery and evacuation. When our tools are purposely built and designed to move large volume. So you're going to notice an absolute time change when using some of these techniques.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to see a lot of that with this HFC phase down. We're going to see, a lot of new refrigerants getting replaced on repairs. And so these times will make a lot of difference.
Yep. Okay. So diagnosing a successful evacuation.
There we go.
All right. So first things first is to recognize that every system is different, even systems that are made by the same manufacturer. So on screen here, we have 2 different systems. I believe they're Goodman, Amana. One is a 1 and 2 stage unit, and the other is an inverter compressor unit. So the one on the left is asking to evacuate the system to 250 microns or less for a 10-minute time period.
Yep.
Where the one on the right is asking for less than 500 for a 10-minute time period.
Mm-hmm.
What I need to do is add some more kind of drastic differences into the slideshow. But some of these, larger systems, their isolation tests can be, a day long. So, and the micron level can be, 2000 microns, it all. Did we lose it?
Had a little technical difficulties as we were broadcasting. Someone pulled the plug. It must have
Sorry,
been
guys.
Silver Screen.
Way to go, bro.
But we thank you all so much for joining us once again. So we're going to split this up. This is actually going to be a very special production. We are doing kind of our holiday special. Eugene and I joining in today. So Eugene and I have we have our display of what atmosphere are we in. My wife always says that I should come with a warning label. I was like, I found the best warning label ever. Right? So look at that.
You wore your nice one.
I'm the nice guy today. Eugene, Eugene, you're the naughty guy. But you know what? Depending on how that conversation goes, we could,
that's cool. I'll be the nice one.
Eugene will be the nice guy.
There we go.
So we thank you all for joining us. We really do have a good time talking about HVAC and refrigeration, building sciences, and we try to bring the fun into these things that may not always be the funnest topics to sit in class with, right? And we try to bring new techniques to our educators to be able to present things in new delivery methods. And so that's what we're here today to do, is we're here to continue conversations and talk about our industry. Make sure to let us know where you're joining us from. I'm here just outside of Indianapolis in Brownsburg, Indiana. Eugene, where are you at these days?
I am in West Palm Beach, Florida.
And Mike Konrad.
Wearing a sweater.
I'm jealous of you, Eugene. I'm in Denver, Colorado.
All right.
But we're actually having some nice weather here, so it's not too cold.
Yeah, same way. It's actually like 50 or so here, so pretty nice. All right, well, we still got a few slides left from last week, so we're going to jump right in and continue our conversations with reclamation and evacuation with A2L and A3 refrigerants. So let's pick off where we were at, Mike.
Yeah, so last time we were talking about diagnosing a successful evacuation. So what I was getting into was the importance of understanding that just because you have the same system manufacturer, you can have different decay tests. And so as a technician, you have to be reading the manuals and understanding what the specifications require. And so an example of this is I have two systems on the screen here, both by Goodman Amana, and one is a 1 and 2 stage unit and the other is an inverter compressor unit. The 1 and 2 stage is asking for 250 microns or less, whereas the other one is asking for 500. Some of these bigger systems can be, 1,000, a couple thousand, and the decay test length can be anywhere from 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a day. I mean, it's all over the place. And so it's really important that you guys read what the system specifications are. And then, so what I have here on the screen is this concept of leak rate. So there are some people out there on the internet that are saying that you can use this formula called leak rate to kind of cheat the decay test. So if you have a 10-minute decay test, they're saying you can get it done in a couple minutes by doing this formula. So what I want to talk about today is why you shouldn't do that, and you should do the full decay test. So for example, we have the one unit that is asking for 250 microns or less. So using that formula, it's asking for us to get to a target decay of 1,000 microns in a 10-minute period. So we're going to take the 250 microns and we're going to subtract that by 1,000. So 1,000 minus 250, and that's going to get us to 750 microns. So then we're going to take 750 microns and divide that by 10, and you get a leak rate of 75 microns a minute. So by using that formula, if I'm on minute 1 and I'm holding 300 microns, man, I'm looking good. And then on minute 2, I have a little bit of a bump and I go to 350. Well, according to that formula, I should be good. Well, guess what? Minute 3, outgassing. Okay, so exactly, Eugene, exactly. So on minute 3, we're going to get outgassing. And next thing that happens is we're jumped up to 700 microns.
Right.
And then on minute 9, we're past 1,000 and we failed. So, never rely on the leak rate alone. Always perform your full decay test. When these system engineers are creating, these units, they're accounting for pipe diameter, how many bends are in the pipe. And so that is why they have these specifications for the micron test. Absolutely. Or the decay test. And so I'm sorry, what'd you say, Clifton?
The capacity in the coils, there's a variety of things that goes in.
There's a lot there. And so, I think I said this last time, Appion, we're going to get you through your recovery and your evacuation very fast. But when we get to the decay test, make sure you do the full decay test and don't cheat the system, because this is really important for not only system performance, but system longevity. And so we really want to make sure that we're doing the full decay test. Do you guys have any questions on that one?
No, makes sense. Follow manufacturer specifications.
Yep.
Sounds legit.
Let me see here. Losing control of my slides.
All right. If it's your signal, give it just a second.
I got it. We're back. So now let's talk about reading your decay test results. So the rate of rise is going to indicate 4 different results. We have acceptable rise, incomplete degassing and dehydration. We have contaminants, and we have system leak. So let's take a look at what this looks like on a graph.
Yeah.
So this dotted line you see is probably going to represent, let's just call it 500 microns. Okay. So the green line is indicating acceptable rise. So we're watching our micron gauge. And by the way, I just want to hit on that full range capability again. when you have a digital vacuum gauge or full range vacuum gauge, you can see everything that I'm talking about in real time and get immediate feedback. So with the acceptable rise line, we're seeing it not go past that hashed line. And so that's saying, okay, we're good to go. We passed our decay test.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the orange line that is going just over the hash line and kind of tapering out. No big deal. That's all that's indicating to us is we just have an incomplete degassing or dehydration phase. So we're just going to continue our evacuation. So then we have this purple or magenta line, and you can see it kind of go way up above our 500 micron point, and then it's going to taper off. If you're having a huge jump like that and then it's tapering off, that's going to signify you have contaminants. So if you're going and getting that line immediately, your best bet is probably just to go ahead, break vacuum, do a nitrogen sweep if you haven't already done it. That way we're avoiding having to do multiple evacuations. Then the last line is going to be your leak line.
Right.
So leaks can vary. So leaks can be immediate depending on how big it is. It can be very fast, or you can actually pull all the way down. And then when you go to isolate, it's such a small leak that you're still going to go all the way back to atmosphere. So it just depends upon how big your leak is. But again, if you have a full range gauge, we can see all this stuff happen immediately. So we're avoiding the headache and we're taking away the guesswork.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah, go ahead.
So if we exercise best practices and we already pressurized with nitrogen and we did a leak check, we did a standing pressure test, there's really no excuse to have, if you have a leak, that it shouldn't shoot back up to atmospheric pressure immediately if we already did a standing pressure test.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
So yeah, I'm sorry. There's a little time left. So if from my experience, if you see that sudden rise to atmosphere, I would check my connections on my gauges that I'm connecting to actually do the evacuation. Because if you did your standing pressure test and you held, and now all of a sudden you're losing vacuum that fast, check the connections you just made to evacuate the system.
I was just gonna say the same thing. It happens to all of us. Even the gaskets, and these connections on your vacuum pump. If you're missing one of those gaskets, I mean, you can still pull down to 2,000 microns, and then you'll be going, why can't I pull down anymore? Sure. So, I mean, it's those little things, but we all fall victim to it. But, I always say slow is smooth is fast. So, as you're prepping for your job, take the time to do the functions test of all your equipment. Take the time to just check everything because you took that time, you're not going to be fast in the end. So slow is smooth is fast. So let's get into a little bit of some evacuation tech tips. So those of you who are using valve core removal tools or have any sort of tool or device with a ball valve in it, those ball valves can seal really well. And so what happens is air molecules get trapped into the corners of that ball valve. And so when you go to blank off for your isolation test, you may see your micron gauge jump a few points. Yeah. And that is because you're freeing up those air molecules that got trapped in the corners of the ball valve. So to help mitigate that from happening, what you can do is, let's just say we have a target micron level of 500. As we are approaching our target micron level, crack the valve core tool handle at a 45-degree angle.
Right.
And then as we pretty much get to 500, start wiggling that handle. And that is going to help free up those trapped air molecules. And we have that little shack GIF there to help kind of remember to do your wiggle.
Do the wiggle. All right. Yeah.
And then
great one.
Yeah, and then some other tech tips here. So breaking a vacuum with a charge. So again, always understand the system manufacturer's requirements, as procedures can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer.
Sure.
Do not install Schrader valves when a system is in a vacuum. You must apply a positive pressure to the system before installing the Schrader valves, and do not remove the vacuum gauge when a system is in a vacuum. And then isolate vacuum gauges from refrigerant flow before breaking a vacuum. So just some other tech tips there. Yeah, now let's get into data logging. Mm-hmm. So we are living in an age now where technology is advancing every single day, right? So, it's most OEMs or, system manufacturers, they're going to start requiring more and more data from the technician as we advance with tool technology. Yeah, so you have things like Bluetooth devices. And so, you have like the Appion Central app where you can connect your gauges and you get a report essentially on the app. So you can data log everything that you're doing. So for example, let's just say I'm doing an evacuation and I have my gauges connected to the app. I'm creating a PDF report that I can either send to my supervisor. So for the supervisors that are listening out there, let's just say you have a technician that's taking a long time on a job site that shouldn't take too long, or you're just genuinely curious about what's going on the job site. You can export a PDF and the technician can send it immediately to the supervisor and he can look at it remotely. Or let's just say you have a compressor that went out, and not your fault at all. That's just the nature of the game. And you go to an OEM and they start giving you a hard time and they're asking you questions, asking you if you did your job correctly. Now, with this information, you can just submit that PDF right to the manufacturer and say, hey, give me my compressor. So, this stuff is awesome. You can take screenshots of it, but, if you take screenshots of your reports, just make sure that you're including all the information that's necessary in there. But yeah, so data logging is huge. Check out the Appion Central app if you haven't already done so. It's an awesome app. We've got plenty of great information on there. And that's pretty much all I got, guys.
Okay. Well,
we were so close last time.
I know. And we really appreciate you coming back and hanging out with us and diving deeper into this. Are there any questions out in the community before we move on to Eugene's unveiling the secret codes of refrigerant identification?
Looks like we don't. I have a QR code on the screen. Scan that QR code. That's going to take you to our social media link tree. You can find everything that I just talked about on our fast evacuation series on YouTube. We have more coming as far as recovery goes. And follow us on social media. I think I mentioned it last time on Instagram. We have Tech Tip Tuesdays and all sorts of good information. So yeah, I appreciate you guys for having us on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
No worries. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Take care, guys.
All right. We'll see you later, buddy.